Good morning. I feel like I'm welcoming family. BIL is family to me, and it's good to see so many familiar faces and dear faces out there. As I was thinking about being here, I was thinking about somebody else I met here in San Francisco, Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese political activist and dissident who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And she talks about the long road to freedom, and freedom is something that's near and dear to my heart. And she says that the road to freedom is as long as you want it to be. But if you are free in your minds, then you will always be free. But if freedom is something that you are expecting from the structures of your country, then the road to freedom is longer. In some cases, much longer. And you need allies along the road. And one of the things that I love about BIL is I think that it's one of the places that I've certainly come to find allies along the path. And there's a question, I think, around allies for what? What are we talking about here? And I love questions because questions for me frame instigating things. They frame the adventures of things. And anyone who knows me knows I like a good adventure. And I like turning to the poets because they're unafraid to ask the big questions like, listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? Or what will you do with your one wild and precious life? And part of the reason I love BIL is because the answers to that are probably going to be pretty unconventional, like extend that life, or create another life, or upload your life, or the variations and the dimensions of the answers get really creative really quickly. But one question that I'm going to start out with is, who am I? And that's a question that cracks me up because I wonder that all the time. I woke up a few years ago and thought, oh my God, I'm just going to get weird as I get older, and that's certainly borne out to be true, and I suspect I am not the only person in this audience that has thought that particular thought. But I'll start answering that question with another question that I often wonder about other people, which is, what are the forms of your belonging? Because in some ways, because we know belonging and because we know exile in different ways, that the forms of our belonging is one way that we get a handle on who it is that we are. So one of my forms of belonging is with the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm our Chief Talent and Culture Officer. If you wonder what the hell a Chief Talent and Culture Officer is, I wondered that my first 6 months on the job. The Wikimedia Foundation, just to give you a little bit of backdrop, is the foundation that runs Wikipedia and all of its sister projects. So we run Wikipedias in 280 different languages. We have 500 million users around the world. You're probably familiar with us and some of our sister projects. We run Wikiquotes, Wikispecies, Wiktionary, Wikibooks. We do not run WikiLeaks. This is a distinction I had to make very clear to my mother. She's adorable. Right up here, actually, I have, this is a project that actually one of our legal counsel, our lawyers coded, and it's some of the recent changes made to Wikipedia live throughout the world that are made anonymously. So it's one of the kind of cool backdrop things that we have. I love working for the Wikimedia Foundation. I think that it's, as a collaborative endeavor, it's part of the way that the world tells its story. So for example, during the Arab Spring in 2011 that started in Tunisia and spread through Egypt and North Africa, we had 1,200 volunteers live editing those pages. It's one of the most beautiful articles out there because you have a lot of people figuring out how to tell the story of what's going on in real time. When the Mars Curiosity rover landed, I was sitting at home in my pajamas chit-chatting on IRC with a bunch of my friends and watching that page get updated live. It's one of the things that I care about. And as Chief Talent and Culture Officer, I'm partly responsible for the sustaining of an organizational system. I think about how do I create structures that are fundamentally liberating structures for people to be a part of so that they can do their best work within an organizational context. My primary focus there is leadership development. It's also looking at how to scale and grow an organization. It's strategy, and it's also, I jokingly say, the ultimate escalation point for crazy in the organization, because any wonky, strange interpersonal issue comes to me, and I take a delight in dealing with that because it's what I built my capacity for, and it's what I'm good at doing, and helping smooth out interpersonal relations so that people can do their best work is something I get really excited about. And I get excited about the Wikimedia Foundation because I care about a free and open internet. So one of the things that pisses me off in this world is that only 13% of the world has access to free internet. There's only 17 countries in the world that technically let their own citizenry have access to free internet, and there's something that strikes me as deeply wrong about that figure. There are a few core ways that we're seeing democracy on the internet be severely curtailed. So one of them is increased surveillance and spying on people. Another way is the increase in regulation and laws about what people can or cannot say on the internet, especially related to media. And then a crackdown on people as they post things in social media spaces. So I'll give you a couple examples of all of them. It's not just the NSA that I'm sure all of you are familiar about with those revelations, but the government of Russia, for instance, has cracked down significantly after Arab Springs. The Saudi Arabian government hires hackers to get data out of WhatsApp and Twitter. And even now you're seeing in Venezuela with the current riots, as there are, as Twitter is trying to filter out the background noise here. Venezuela, they're using things like Zello and WhatsApp to try to organize, and those state-run communications companies are shutting down those apps and shutting down the ability for people to be able to communicate with one another. Another incident that I'm familiar with is governments using various malware on and targeting specific activists. So one of the things that I work on is something called the Oslo Freedom Forum. It's an incredible gathering of human rights activists. Somebody once referred to it as Comic-Con with real superheroes, except that those superheroes, instead of decisive defeats against the bad guy, more often than not end up tortured, exiled, and fighting against impossible odds, but they're amazing human beings. But I'm in Oslo in the city hall where the Nobel Peace Prize is given out, talking to Jacob Appelbaum. He's got a white noise generator hanging out between us. And while he's there, he's talking to an Angolan dissident and also decrypting their hard drives and discovering that the Angolan government has actually, through malware, gotten a program on his computer that reports all of his keystrokes to a company in India that's been hired out by them. So you're seeing governments increasingly, especially corrupt governments, shut down freedom of the internet in really, frankly, creepy and appalling ways. And I mentioned the increased punishment of users. On Twitter, 10 people were arrested last year for insulting the King of Bahrain on Twitter. And in India, a couple of women posted on Facebook about traffic in their local neighborhood because of the funeral of a right-wing Hindu political party person. And both of those women were arrested. One woman for posting the thing, the other one for liking that post. And this is a crazy world we live in some ways. I can't believe some of the things that are going on. I'm also part of a project called Disrupt North Korea. This is an attempt to disrupt the stranglehold of information that the North Korean government has on 25 million of its citizenry and there's a couple ways to do it. One is smuggling Wikipedia and Desperate Housewives and other Korean telenovelas and media. This is interesting what people want. Across the Sino-North Korean border or using balloons to float it over. It's illegal to own a tunable radio in North Korea, just in case you're wondering, because God forbid that you tune into a station that might have, non-governmental news on it. But figuring out radio technology is one of the things that we're doing in that area. So there's a lot of ways that, for me, the intersection of technology and human rights is huge. And it's something that I think disproportionately affects women. So when I think about let me draw a circular example to you. One of the other things I'm constantly fascinated by right now is drones. I think it's fascinating that drones can be used across a whole wide variety of sectors. The Japanese government used it to track nuclear levels of radiation at Fukushima and track schools of tuna. Costa Rica uses drones to monitor active volcanoes. We use drones charmingly called predators on the Mexican-United States border. But the same kind of drones that can track the game in a 90,000-acre nature wildlife preserve is the same kind of drone that can be used to track human trafficking victims. Human trafficking is another cause I care deeply about. There's an estimate of between 10 to 27 million human slaves in the world. It's the fastest black market growing industry in the world. I remember when I was a little girl, my parents took me to see the Lincoln Memorial, and I took very seriously Lincoln's words. This 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men were created equal. I toss women in there too. But I took that very seriously, and it was appalling to me to realize that trafficking is on the rise this much. 2 million children estimated by UNICEF in the global sex trade That's children in the sex trade, and it's appalling to me. These things should not exist, and it's appalling to me that you can use technology, which I firmly believe should be used for the good and the benefit of people, that you can use GPS trackers to track your human slaves. This is not okay. And another way that technology shows up in the trafficking industry is the mining of coltan. So Dominican Republic of the Congo is rated the worst place in the world to be a woman. And there are a lot of really shitty places in the world to be a woman, so the fact that this is at the rock bottom of it is appalling and astonishing to me. And part of the reason there's so much trafficking in that particular region is the mining coltan, which is a mineral that's used in our cell phones and our PS2s and our gaming devices. And it's mined by primarily women and children, and then trafficked usually into Asia, and then sold to media companies and technology companies to be used because it's valuable. So it's astonishing the subtle and interconnected and deep drivers of all of these issues. I think about technology and gender as two of the major leverage points when I think about playing a long game in this world, and so those are a couple things I track. I often say that when I've traveled throughout the Middle East, that I am often angry on behalf of women who can't get an education, but I am sad on behalf of men in those countries because they can never have a full experience of being a man in a place where half of the human race is experiencing oppression. And these are long, hard, entrenched battles that we're in the middle of. There's a great text from the 2nd century BCE. It's called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and it's a text about yoga long before yoga became a fitness fad. But the text goes that the battle is long and arduous, and long years have gone into making of this foe, and do not go into this without counting the cost. And from these long past ages, mind-born children will spring up to fight for mind. This is why I care about the theme of BIL, Mind Set Free, because we need to keep fighting these ongoing battles against oppression and ignorance and injustice and bigotry. And we have to use the tools at our disposal and update our own ability to engage with complexity to be able to do this. So as I work for the Wikimedia Foundation and I work for global women's human rights issues, I think often about what does it mean for me and for all of us to collectively play a long game? What does it mean for us to be in this for the long haul? And part of that for me is knowing what it is to be at effect in this world. And the example that I have for that is I've spent a while working for Yale University and running. I'd go for a run in the mornings in New Haven, Connecticut, and there was a graveyard there with a group of graves from the Civil War. And one particular struck me of a kid who died at 17 fighting in the Civil War, and how much we are at effect of the collective choices that were made in that area to be in the world that we're in now. Or I think about wandering around in the Alhambra in Granada in Spain and standing in the room where Isabella finally told Columbus for the 3rd time, after he asked the 3rd time, that he could go explore the New World. We are at effect of those choices, and we are parts of what will be at effect for generations downstream for us. So I think a lot about leverage, and I think a lot about playing a long game. And for me, leverage always has to start with us as individuals and the way that we embrace freedom in our own minds. So I'm going to take what might seem like a detour and talk a little bit about capacity, because I think having the capacity to bear on the complexity of issues is what makes me able to live and work at all of these intersections. And part of the way that I've developed that capacity hasn't been an easy road. So you heard a little bit of the shiny pieces of the bio, and I can talk about the masters and the work that I do. But I also want to talk about some of the hard things, because some of the hard places is where I've built the capacity to exist in the world in the ways that I have. So I want to mention and make transparent that I've struggled with depression my whole life, and it's something that I've struggled with since high school. And it's something that learning to live with despair and learning to live with dark questions has been part of my ability to step into and look at the scale of human suffering. I want to talk about my 2 divorces lightly. I was at a holiday party, and a friend of mine, I was singing with great gusto some of the songs related to the Jewish faith, Baruch Atah Adonai, with the whole lighting of the menorah. And a friend of mine said, "How do you know all these songs?" I'm like, "Well, because my 2 ex-husbands were Jewish." And this is not a conversation you want to have on a first date either. But as much as there was joy in those marriages, there's also a lot of grief in them, because it takes something to break vows that you've made in front of your community, of your friends and your loved ones, and to wonder if you can still make vows. There's a great poem called All the True Vows that talks about how out of the silence where no one can hear you, you can make a new vow, one that it will kill you to break. But the thing is, as you know, when relationships end, you don't just lose in the moment of the relationship or the history of the relationship, but you also lose the dream that you might have that person by your side when you die. And I know what it is to be helpless and in terror, and to not let the experience of a sexual assault diminish or define me. And I know what it is to choose to not bear a child, and to wonder who that person would have been in my life, and to realize that there are some questions deep in your life that you will never know if you made the right decision about. And I name this partly to say that the building of capacity for me, has existed in all of those areas. To know what it is to lose family and friends in accidents. I had a friend of mine who died in the most ridiculous way possible, got run over by a maintenance truck as she was sunbathing with her baby. And I often say that life, we orient to the probable in so many ways. We orient to the possible that our alarm will go off when we get up in the morning, we go to work, but life happens in the possible. And life happens in the possible in some beautiful ways, but it also happens in the possible in some really terrifying ways. And I learned from that, and I'm going to borrow another poet because I like them so much for what they have the words to say. Naomi Shihab Nye says, "Before you know kindness is the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow is the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to sorrow until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth." And there is something about being able to see the size of the cloth and engage with this complexity in terms of the craziness and the beauty of this world we face that I think is so necessary to be able to live and lead at the intersection of technology and human rights. So I'm going to talk a bit about a couple choices that I feel like I've made to be able to exist healthily in this space. The first choice is I'm going to draw on the work of Dave Snowden. I'm going to differentiate Dave Snowden from Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden is the NSA leaks guy. Dave Snowden is a complexity theorist whose work is pretty amazing. And he talks about how we need to recognize deeply different domains in our life. So one of those domains is in the realm of the simple. In the realm of the simple, where cause and effect are obvious. The choice I make is around choosing the deep structures that are opening and liberating for you in your lives. And part of what I mean by that is I think practices like a trellis, like the trellises that can keep the rest of the structures of my life whole and sane and open, which is why I often talk about liberating structures. And I saw Todd Huffman post on Facebook this morning that after 5 bills, he has finally learned to go to bed early the night before a bill. And sometimes the liberating structures are just that. It's the choice to get a good night's sleep. It's the choice to exercise because you know that sustains your body. It's a choice for me of a meditation practice or a daily dance practice with the music turned on full volume before I get dressed in the morning. It's all of those practices that allow me to be full and able to engage in the rest of my life. In the realm of the complicated, and I don't mean the Facebook, it's complicated. In the realm of the complicated where cause and effect are less visible. I talk when I do leadership development work about the difference between technical and adaptive challenges, where technical challenges are the ones that you can apply a body of expertise to. So in the realm of the complicated, I choose being competent, getting good at things. It's the repeated practice over and over again in something so that you know when the moment is opportune and ripe, that you know what to do. I think about Dune because he and I are both archers. He's a far better archer than I am. I am mainly only deadly to hay bales at 10 feet away. But it's the repeated practice of the arm and the movement and the gauging of the wind and the light so that you know how to hit your targets. And the realm of the complex, which is the realm I'm deeply interested in because it's the realm that involves human beings and it's the realm that I'm referring to when I talk about all of the technology issues that we face and all of the human rights issues that we face. But in the realm of the complex, there's something really powerful about choosing uncertainty. And there's a deep irony in that choice because the uncertain happens anyways. We are inherently uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. We can make good guesstimates. But there's something about choosing uncertainty, choosing to be able to be alive to a sense of timing, to a sense of possibility. The Greeks have two words for time. One is kairos and one is chronos. Chronos is time that's defined, that says, theoretically, I have about 30 minutes for this talk. Somebody is shortly going to tell me where I am in that. But chronos is the agreed upon time, that this would start somewhere around 10 a.m. Kairos is a sense of opportunity. It's a sense of opening. It's a sense of ripening. It's a sense of timing. And there's something so important, I think, about being able to exist sensitive to the broader range of elements. Another poet says that, let your vulnerabilities be this once a faculty for which to sense things as they are about to happen. That there's a real capacity and tenderness that can be brought to bear when you can open up and be in the moment of things and sense them as they're coming up. My favorite definition of wisdom is where you have the capacity for discernment on one hand, to see deeply into the nature of reality, to understand reality, and that includes the existential nature of reality, which means those pieces that we have that we experience just by knowing and being human, that we age, that we experience loss, that we experience joy, that we experience grief, that we experience community, like Bill. So the capacity for discernment on the one hand and the capacity for right action on the other, again, to borrow a Buddhist notion, that we know how and when and why we act in the capacities that we act for. And the last choice I choose is joy. And I choose joy because I'm not interested in being a martyr. I'm really not. And we get to hold down this part of the human experience. We get to hold down this pole of it. There's enough suffering in this world, there's enough suffering in our lives, but we get to choose joy. We get to choose to come to events like this where we get to be in community with one another, we get to learn, we get to teach. So there's a real power in choosing joy. So the last thing that I want to say is there's a great line from actually a children's book. And I love this book because what this woman did, the author whose name I'm blanking on, she got a bunch of questions from 4 to 12-year-olds and got famous neuroscientists and authors to answer them. And they're great. Like David Eagleman answers the question of why can't you be tickled? But my favorite question in there is, what is it to fall in love? And this beautiful author, Jeanette Winterson, answers that. And she says, falling in love isn't like falling down in a hole. It's like falling through space. And she draws this beautiful allegory of what it is to sort of see someone signaling from another planet and you kind of wanting to be over on that other planet with them. And falling in space is jumping into the darkness to be with somebody that you don't want to be without. And the line that gets me every time is, P.S., you have to be brave. So I think all of this work to engage with complexity, to engage with all of this, there's a P.S. that you have to be brave. Amelia Earhart, famous aviator, made the first transcontinental flight as a woman. In her very last letter to her husband, she wrote, I want to do this because I want to do this. This is the letter that she wrote right before she was taking the flight that her plane got lost on. But she wrote, women must try as men have, and if we fail, let our failure be but a signal to others. And she was also a poet, and she wrote the lines, courage is the price that life extracts for granting peace. So that's what I want to leave you with, is that courage is the price that life extracts for granting peace. Thank you. I am happy to take a couple questions. I've got about 5 minutes, yes. Okay. Are there any questions in the audience?
There's a mic up here, audience right, if people want to make their way to the mic. Hi. Among the many things you touched on was the issue of the relationship between coltan and the trafficking of women. And I just wanted to hear a little more about why there's a particular relationship between those two things. Like, why is it that trafficking of women isn't an issue in mining other minerals, for example? Is there something about Congo?
Trafficking of women, it's complicated, but women are, so human slavery is used in the mining of coltan in the DRC because people are press ganged by local militias to work the mines in pretty appalling conditions. So the way that coltan is mined is the same way that gold mining happened, panning. So you dig out, it's actually got a huge environmental impact too, where you dig out riverbeds and then you essentially use pans to move massive amounts of dirt to pick up coltan. The reason it disproportionately affects women is in two ways. One, 80% of human trafficking victims are women because human trafficking tends to affect people who are more vulnerable. So for sure, straight up numbers, it affects women in that way in terms of the proportion of people who are human trafficking slaves. The other ways that it disproportionately affects women specifically in that region is those local militias use rape as a weapon of war. So the way that you suppress the backbone of any group in order to do protest or uprise is by breaking their spirit, and mass scale rape is a great way to do it, unfortunately. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Hi there.
One of the things you talked about was the right of free access to the internet.
Yes.
And how that is actually rare in the world right now.
Yes.
I read a story in I guess it was on CNN recently, about the situation of actual slavery in Mauritania. Mm-hmm. They don't have child slavery, they just have everybody's slavery.
Yes.
And the slaves don't know they're slaves. They think the word servant means you work for someone forever for nothing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you read that story, but it brought tears to my eyes, and I went looking for a website to donate money immediately. I just said, shut up and take my money, how do I help? Mm-hmm. And they didn't have a website except for one that was made in 2006, and when I tried to email all the contact email addresses, they didn't respond, they were blacked out. I wonder does Wikimedia have, you mentioned you also work with the Freedom Forum.
Yes.
And I saw the founder of SOS to Clave had spoken at the Freedom Forum a couple years ago.
Yes.
Did you get a chance to meet him, or do you know anything about how people can help in Mauritania, even just on the internet front?
I don't. I can find out. There's a great organization called International Justice Mission. It's a Christian organization, and I'm trained as a Zen Buddhist, but they do incredible work in some of those areas, including having investigators in that region. Okay. And if I don't know someone, I will find out for you, so let me know.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?